The United States of America is widely acknowledged as the most powerful country in the world. Yet in Cyberpunk 2077, this is no longer the case. If one attempted to elucidate who were the agents of America's destruction, this distinction belongs to the Gang of Four. The gang was formed by the NSA, CIA, FBI, and the DEA. For those unfamiliar with these acronyms or organizations, the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, is a civilian foreign intelligence service of the federal government tasked with gathering and analyzing national security information from around the world. The NSA, National Security Agency, is an intelligence agency of the US Department of Defense. The FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, is the domestic intelligence and security service of the US and its principal federal law enforcement agency. Finally, there is the DEA, or Drug Enforcement Administration, a federal law enforcement agency under the US Department of Justice, tasked with combating drug smuggling and distribution. Threatened by the growing power of the European Economic Community, or EEC, the Gang of Four began to embark on a suicidal course of covert aggression, later to be known as the Quiet War. As EEC power grew, US interference in Europe was less tolerated. Soon the EEC was the world power, and the US was playing second fiddle, particularly in its overreaching international policies. One of the EEC's first actions was to defy US wishes and send much-needed aid to the Soviet states. The result was that the Soviets accepted the Eurodollar over US currency, and NATO collapsed as the Soviets made peace with Western Europe for the first time in over 40 years. Infuriated by this loss, and fearful that the Euro's expanding space program would give the EEC military superiority as well, the NSA embarked on a headlong campaign to undermine the structure of the EEC, using tactics ranging from stock market fraud to the attempted disruption of the first EEC-Soviet military treaty talks. To appear solvent, the Gang of Four began manipulating the stock markets of Europe and Asia by hacking directly into these systems. These artificial currency and stock manipulations allowed the gang to promote an illusion of American wealth, but at a high cost. When this was discovered by the EEC, the Euros simply leaked the info to the world press. With the implied security of the exchange rate undermined, the system collapsed. This disaster would be called the Crash of '94. In reaction to the discovery of this fraud, most developed countries immediately instituted embargoes on United States trade. These embargoes were crippling to America. Furthermore, when the Gang of Four destroyed the South American drug trade in around 1992, they also decimated many of the local economies as well. The drug trade supported a large part of the Third World. The drug lords bought weapons, fielded troops, and provided jobs in places where there was no other infrastructure. When these groups fragmented, many people had no trade, money, or sustenance. Although parts of South America were supported for a time by the Gang of Four in its struggles to control the region, or by surviving cartels busily warring with the gang, the damage was done, and a myriad of powerful enemies were made. These groups allied with the EEC and its corporate organizations, which provided the remaining South American guerrillas with weapons, food, vehicles, and advisors. The result was that money and manpower, desperately needed to rebuild America, was siphoned off to a drug war America could not win. The third and final cause of the collapse was environmental, as the biomes of Earth were despoiled by corporate greed and short-sighted policies. Acid rain and changing climates began to make it harder to grow crops, keep soil fertile, and irrigate effectively. The effects were already evident and getting worse every year, culminating in 1998 as the Dust Bowls of the Midwest. By 1994, thanks to the manipulations of the American government, the World Stock Exchange finally collapsed. Human civilization was changed forever. The elderly suffered first, the millions of Americans who lived on pensions and investments. The work and savings of their lives evaporated. They became homeless or were forced to move in with relatives. A lucky few were able to re-enter the workforce. Many died from exposure or violence. Some families pulled together or were forced into clannish styles of living. Even homeless, they made it, but millions of others died. Both the World Bank and the World Stock Exchange were gone. Federal bonds were cashed in at a rate so high that the government could barely print money fast enough. This devalued the dollar and accelerated the process. Assets of the executive branch, especially the military reserves, were committed in growing numbers in a Herculean struggle to control the violence as it spread like wildfire across America. The military was not committed until August 1996. On August 17th, both the president and vice president were killed during separate campaign stops. As the situation grew worse, a joint session of Congress was convened to deal with the issue of who would lead the country. Absurd levels of infighting prevented anyone from forming a coalition. Martial law was established. Several members of the Senate attempted to form corporate-backed coalitions. These were beaten down soundly. The greatest problem, however, the one that proved nearly insurmountable, remained: the Gang of Four. The members were legally capable of doing anything to anyone at any time. The NSA was by far the most powerful of the Gang of Four agencies. They could work in or out of the United States with no legal restrictions whatsoever. Most operatives in the NSA were either attached to the Department of Defense or untraceable, lost in the absurd amount of paperwork the government generated. After the declaration of martial law in 1996, several theoretical mathematicians in the military intelligence community began to note incongruities in the way that the various government agencies were operating in sync. There seemed to be a great deal of black ops being done without any authorization whatsoever. In a totally unrelated move of desperation, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs formed the MIC, or Military Intelligence Cooperative, to deal with the vast amount of duplication in the 9 intel agencies of the US military. Despite the protests of the NSA and CIA, the MIC remained its own department. Taking this as a discovery of their true motives, the Gang of Four took several putative steps to sabotage the MIC. At first, the MIC thought it was under attack from just the NSA, since the NSA was also attached to the Department of Defense. It was believed that a natural rivalry would exist, but soon problems started coming in from the CIA, FBI, and DEA. It was painfully apparent, in Washington at least, that the Gang of Four had been acting on its own for some time. The MIC, having found enough cause for alarm in its investigation, immediately recommended the dissolution of the DEA and FBI to the president. Being that the duties of law enforcement were being completely handled by military courts and the CID, Military Intelligence Criminal Investigation Division, their existence was deemed unnecessary. Still, not powerful enough to attack the strongest member of the Gang of Four directly. Eliminating the DEA and FBI would allow the president to get rid of half of the problem. President Jonathan Seward, however, was not stupid. He realized that in order to combat such a powerful cabal, he would need the military, and the military was busy trying to keep rioting and looting from tearing the nation apart by instituting the Federal Weapons Statute and allowing weaponry to be carried openly for protection of self and property. Seward managed to cut rioting as much as 30% in most urban areas. This freed up the military assets he needed to finish off the NSA. Fate, however, was not letting anyone off that easily. By 2000, the firestorms of the Pacific Northwest and the wasting plague had brought the nation to its knees. Touring the country, trying to deal with the wasting plague, Mr. Seward was tragically killed in a riot. Ironically, he was killed by the same citizens he had armed. General William Newell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, took his place. An older man, he was set in his ways and decided that the best way to deal with the NSA was to wait for the enemy to make a mistake. Unfortunately, waiting cost him dearly. The NSA initiated hostilities with 5 countries, forcing the general into the Second Central American War. The army that Seward had freed up was sent to another dirty war, and the NSA retained its position of dominance. The so-called drug war had really been over for years, almost since the bioplague had destroyed the cocoa and opium in the 90s. The American agricultural base had been destroyed by the mounting problems of the environment. Acid rain, drought, and toxic waste had made the previously profitable fruit-growing areas of California, Texas, and Florida economic wastelands. The stabilization of these South American countries could provide new areas for cultivation. Since the restructuring of the Soviet Union, hundreds of nuclear weapons had gone on the open market. Many of these weapons had made it to South America. The possibility of a nuclear enemy within the Americas was horrifying to the gang. By testing special operations, new cyber troops, both the nuclear threat and cyber training could be dealt with at once. Over half of the Special Operations Command, aka SOC, was controlled or attached to the CIA. William Noel's connections in the SOC led him to the truth about the Gang of Four. He allowed the SOC full immunity if they would testify, and testify they did, revealing that the NSA had planned and coordinated the apparent accidental deaths of many high-level members of the former United States government, including the death of the president himself. After the testimony of the SOC, the CIA's command structure was co-opted into the plan to eliminate the NSA. 3 months later, in March of 2004, a bloodbath in Washington rid the NSA and CIA of their mid-level subversive elements. It was this cooperation in the destruction of the NSA that led to the CIA's reformation as part of the new government. It took another 4 years and bloody covert fighting worldwide to eliminate the more powerful elements of the Gang of Four. Huge damage was done to the United States intelligence community, damage that would never be repaired. On November 7th, 2008, the first free elections in America were held. It had taken 12 years, but the transition to the new federal Senate was marred by relatively few acts of violence. The final death rows of the gang took place in metropolitan Washington. Bottled up by the military, their operatives simply could not get out, and their allies could not get in. Many of the states surrounding DC simply blockaded all traffic and let the gang beat itself to death against the military. It now seems strange that an organization like the NSA was destroyed so quickly. The truth is, there was no way to eliminate an organization of such size and power. It was not killed, just maimed. Those with real power in the gang had sold out to the mega corporations long before the organization was directly attacked, and thus they continue to exert their influence under a new guise.